In 4032 AD, environmental degradation caused humans to mutate into bloodthirsty and brutal mutated beings, leading to the complete collapse of Earth's civilization. A scientist foresaw this event and created an absolutely safe town for humanity, selecting a small number of people to put into a 2,000-year slumber, allowing them to escape human extinction. However, most of them were unaware of the truth and had been forcibly brought there. Under a regime of cruel and high-pressure rule, Wayward Pines experienced an unprecedented rebellion, though unfortunately, they ultimately failed. Eventually, control of Wayward Pines fell into the hands of the first-generation youth, who inherited the founder Pilcher's cruel will, making the town resemble a large prison even more. Theo was a brilliant surgeon. During a seaside vacation, he struck up a conversation with a bartender and unknowingly drank until he passed out. Undoubtedly, Theo was one of the chosen. When he woke up again, he was already in Wayward Pines. 2,000 years in the future, a young woman told him a patient urgently needed treatment and he must go to the hospital immediately. Theo only remembered being on vacation with his wife yesterday. How could he suddenly be in this town? The street broadcast announced that due to rampant unlawful activity, a curfew would be imposed in 30 minutes. Theo felt increasingly uneasy. Seizing the moment when the driver wasn't paying attention, he rolled out of the Jeep. Kerry stopped the soldier who wanted to shoot, watching helplessly as Theo disappeared. He then went to a nearby house seeking help, wanting to use the phone to call the police. Unfortunately, he didn't know most residents here were absolute loyalists to the town's leader. Theo dialed the phone repeatedly with no answer. Seeing the homeowner's weird looks, he had no choice but to leave. However, the homeowner soon reported his whereabouts. Theo had to run wildly until blocked by a wall. The area was littered with bullet casings, the wall covered in bullet holes and bloodstains. Seeing soldiers catching up, he fearfully raised his hands. Theo was quickly taken to the hospital by the soldiers. Theo asked Kerry why he couldn't see any doctors in this hospital. Kerry told him the only doctor here had died recently, which was why he was brought in to treat a patient. Before the surgery, Jason, the new generation leader of the town, personally received Theo, claiming the town was merely an official social experiment project. Theo had previously encountered a tornado at the beach and was rescued to participate in this experiment, and his wife Rebecca was already on her way here. As long as he completed the surgery, he would be able to see her. Theo didn't believe Jason's lies, but adhering to his professional duty to heal, he went to the patient's room to examine the injury. The patient turned out to be Kate, one of the rebel leaders. Her wound was festering and required immediate surgery. So, observed by several assistants and a group of students, Theo successfully performed the surgery. Meanwhile, Jason and his assistant Kerry discussed the recent situation in the office. The town faced many new rebellions, and despite Jason's harsh suppression, the security forces suffered heavy losses. They needed the new generation youth to learn medical skills quickly. Unexpectedly, Megan, the former mentor of the first generation, was not dead. She assisted Jason in maintaining Pilcher's original vision at all costs. She always advocated using brutal methods to eliminate these unlawful elements. Jason's greatest enemy now was a man named Ben, the son of Ethan, the town sheriff. 3 years ago, Ethan sacrificed himself to save many residents' lives. Now Ben, inheriting his father's ideal to overthrow the cruel rule, had become the spiritual leader of the rebellion. Early the next morning, Kate woke from her coma after surgery. Seeing Theo checking on her, she immediately urged him not to believe Jason's lies. Theo wanted to ask more, but noticed one of Kate's hands was tightly cuffed to the bed. Their conversation was then interrupted by Kerry, who told Theo to meet his wife at the town hotel. Not long after he left the ward, Jason came to pressure Kate, demanding she reveal the whereabouts of the other rebel leader, Ben. Kate was somewhat smug. She had previously led her followers to destroy the chip tracking and surveillance systems precisely for this effect, and naturally wouldn't reveal Ben's hiding place. Since this path was blocked, Jason decided to adopt a more extreme plan. Theo had now reached the streets of Wayward Pines, which looked even more desolate than before. Passing a coffee shop, Theo saw soldiers forcibly taking away a female employee. She waved goodbye to her child with great reluctance. Theo asked the soldiers, "Where are you taking her?" They didn't answer, instead instructing him to wait in a room for Rebecca's arrival. Theo tried the doors and windows. All were tightly locked. Clearly, he was under house arrest. Just as he was worrying, a man suddenly pried open the window from outside and helped Theo escape the hotel. He was one of Kate's followers, wanting to ask if Kate was safe. While they were talking, Theo saw countless residents gathering towards the square. It turned out the town leader, Jason, was going to give a speech there. He defined the group led by Ben and Kate as rebels destroying the town. He then had his men bring up several members of Ben's team. Since they refused to reveal his whereabouts, Jason ordered the soldiers to execute them publicly in front of the crowd. Theo, in the audience, knew the woman was a mother. Furious, he tried to rush onto the stage but was stopped by a soldier. Just as Jason was about to execute the second captive, an angry shout rang out. Ben had revealed himself. Jason perked up and immediately ordered his men to subdue him. With the capture of the final leader, Ben, it meant the rebellion in the town was completely quelled. Theo soon met his wife Rebecca, but he wasn't happy. He knew this wasn't an experiment and wanted to escape the town with his wife. However, he was immediately taken by soldiers to Jason, who invited Theo to dine together. But Theo refused outright. Theo angrily demanded to know what this place really was. Jason paused, then told him to get in the car first. The soldiers stuffed Theo, Ben, and several others into a vehicle. Jason now showed his true colors. He wanted a doctor loyal to himself, and Theo's recent actions reminded him too much of the past Ethan. He decided to eliminate this threat. Back at the town hospital, Megan entered Kate's room and smugly informed her that Ben had been captured, and Kate was now useless. She then injected a large dose of medication into Kate's IV line. But Kate suddenly leapt from the bed and overpowered Megan in a flash. But seeing no hope now, she didn't harm Megan. Instead, she slit her own throat with a scalpel. Meanwhile, the car carrying Theo and Ben reached the perimeter wall. The driver punched Theo unconscious and then jammed a rock onto the accelerator. After the perimeter gate opened, the Jeep sped outward, only stopping when it crashed into a large tree. Theo, unconscious, was awakened by terrifying shrieks. He saw countless Abbies swarming past the Jeep, rushing wildly toward the open perimeter gate. Jason and others at the base saw on the monitors that the Abbies were trying to scale the wall by forming a human ladder. Soldiers were immediately dispatched to the scene. Fortunately, the Abbies didn't notice the nearby Jeep. Theo and Ben scrambled out and fled into the woods. Soon after, Jason arrived with soldiers. Some Abbies had already crossed the perimeter wall. Kerry was immediately pounced on by an Abbie and seriously injured. Other soldiers fired continuously, occasionally throwing high explosive grenades. Under the intense firepower, the Abbies finally began to retreat. Jason, face full of tension, picked up Kerry and rushed her to the hospital for treatment. But the doctor told him he had no experience performing surgery. It was then Jason remembered he had just sent the surgeon, Theo, outside the wall. He immediately contacted the soldiers. Cameras spotted Theo in the fields outside. He had to be retrieved immediately. Several military jeeps were dispatched and quickly located Theo, who was under attack by the Abbies. When Theo returned to the hospital, he did not agree to Jason's request to operate on the severely injured Kerry immediately, instead demanding to see his wife. Theo put everything on the line, stating that if he died, there would be no doctor left here. Jason, forced into a corner, quickly brought Rebecca over. The couple was finally reunited, but Theo had no intention of performing the surgery. He demanded Jason reveal the truth about the town. The young ruler panicked and laid out the facts about humanity's destruction truthfully. But Theo thought Jason was spinning another tale. It was Rebecca who persuaded him gently to do the surgery first. Theo's medical skills were truly remarkable. Kerry pulled through the critical phase in just one night. Theo and his wife then returned to a residence within the town. It turned out Rebecca had been there for 3 years and had gradually learned some truth. She told Theo the story of the world's destruction was very likely real. Theo felt like he was dreaming, remembering he was just on vacation with his wife a few days ago. Rebecca immediately slapped him, telling him to wake up, that dwelling on this wasn't the priority right now. Because Rebecca had heard the town's food supplies were dwindling rapidly, and how to survive here was the biggest problem. Actually, Rebecca was absolutely correct. For some unknown reason, the chemical concentration in the soil within Wayward Pines had changed, making it impossible for any food crops to survive, forcing them to cultivate only on land outside the perimeter wall. But every time they harvested, they had to dispatch enough soldiers to ensure the safety of the harvesters. During yesterday's battle, Soldier Mario noticed the Abbies seemed terrified of firelight. He suggested using fire as a defense during this harvest. It proved Mario's plan was successful. When the soldiers guarding the harvest used flamethrowers, they quickly drove back the surrounding Abbies. While they were harvesting, a figure suddenly flashed in the fields. It was Ben, the rebel leader exiled from the town. Although they were all first-generation youth, the soldiers chose to ignore Ben. After harvesting the crops, they closed the perimeter gate directly, abandoning Ben mercilessly. But Ben did not give up. He knew the perimeter wall monitors could hear him speak. According to the rules set by the town's founder, Pilcher, First-generation members were forbidden from harming each other, but Jason, the town leader, who harbored deep hatred for him, immediately ordered the monitors shut off. Ben's disappearance meant the town's rebellion was truly over, and with large quantities of food transported into the town easing the food crisis, Jason felt no guilt, instead riding high on success. Ben's mother, Teresa, was the exact opposite. Ever since learning her son was exiled, she lived in constant fear. As soon as the harvest security team returned, she rushed to ask about her son's whereabouts. These soldiers clearly knew Ben's situation, but remained tight-lipped. Teresa angrily shouted that this was blatant murder. The facts proved her right. Ben was still hiding in the cornfield when he suddenly saw figures approaching up ahead. Jason, basking in his success, received more good news. Footage from outside the perimeter wall showed the Abbies had all vanished. Thermal signals covering a 35-mile radius also detected no Abbies. Jason speculated if the earlier flamethrowers had scared them away. Kerry coldly reminded him if they should take the chance to rescue Ben. If he died, Jason would break the rule against harming the first generation. Suddenly, noise came from downstairs. Jason went to investigate with his gun and found Nurse Pam, who was also Pilcher's sister. Ever since Pam killed Pilcher, Jason had kept her under house arrest in a small building. Now, for some reason, Pam had gotten out by herself. Jason was also curious about this, stating he was executing Pilcher's plan step by step, producing enough food to slowly expand the town outward. Pam looked at Jason with great satisfaction. These plans were ones she helped Pilcher create, and now she wanted to assist Jason in completing them better. Jason agreed without hesitation, even welcoming Pam's return in front of the whole town. Jason could accept Pam again, partly because of her abilities, but there was another more important reason. It turned out Jason was the first child born in Wayward Pines. Pam had poured enormous energy into him, grooming him as the next leader from childhood. There were even rumors that Jason was actually Pam's biological son. However, Pam's purpose for appearing now seemed less than pure. She was sneaking into the medical room, appearing to search for something, and was caught by Theo. Although Theo, with his wife's constant persuasion, was gradually accepting the fact of civilization's destruction, he had no respect for Jason as a mindless leader. But out of professional medical duty, he took his job seriously, gradually integrating into the town's hospital life, so he remained wary of the suspicious Pam. To his surprise, Pam knew all about his past. She casually dismissed him and then took a syringe from the cabinet and hid it in her pocket. Pam then went to the town's laboratory. The guard soldiers initially wouldn't let her pass, but relying on her relationship with Jason, she walked in without hesitation. This was the biochemical lab used to study the Abbies. Pam was familiar with it. She went to the low-temperature storage cabinet and secretly took out a vial of virus sample, putting it in her pocket. Megan, now the lab director, arrived just then. She had always resented Pam for killing the founder and unceremoniously kicked her out. Pam had achieved her goal and soon arrived at her former residence. Seeing residents executed arbitrarily filled her with profound sadness. She took out her favorite red dress, then brought out the virus in the syringe, just about to inject herself when she spotted Theo approaching. It turned out the hospital was short-staffed. He had come to ask Pam for help. During their talk, he inadvertently saw the syringe on the bed but said nothing and hurried away. Pam seemed to have made a grave decision. With a tragic expression, she injected the virus into herself. In the town's war room, Jason was meeting with his team, discussing plans to expand now that the Abbies had vanished. Suddenly, Pam entered in her red dress. She greeted Jason warmly, then sat down ready to join the discussion. Suddenly, Theo burst in, sternly telling everyone to stand up and keep their distance as he needed to run a virus test. Megan, arriving right after, immediately accused Pam of trying to kill everyone. Just moments earlier, a lab worker had discovered a vial of smallpox virus was missing. Megan remembered Pam had visited the lab and immediately called Theo. He recalled seeing the syringe in Pam's house and suspected she was trying to spread the virus, so he rushed over to stop her. Seeing her plan exposed, Pam hid nothing. Her original purpose in grooming Jason as leader was for Wayward Pines to achieve a peaceful end, but his brutal rule in recent years had deeply disappointed her. So she intended to use the smallpox virus to destroy Jason and his group, hoping to set Wayward Pines back on the right track. She felt deep guilt for not having educated Jason properly, because as Jason grew up, he became increasingly rebellious, coincidentally encountering the mentor Megan. Influenced by her brutal ideology, Jason drifted further from Pam's original vision, leading to the current situation. Theo's test results came back quickly. Because it was discovered in time, Pam's virus was still in the latent phase and hadn't infected anyone, greatly increasing Jason's favor towards him. But for this elder who had been both mentor and mother figure, Jason chose to personally end her life. After this event, the town's ruler seemed to have matured considerably. He quickly adjusted his mindset and gathered the key personnel to restart the discussion on town expansion. Agriculture expert CJ held high prestige. He was the one who insisted, against opposition, on planting crops outside the perimeter wall, which had now proven crucial. He felt they should first find soil suitable for cultivation. Jason strongly agreed, also revealing an important piece of news. The town's founder, Pilcher, once dispatched 12 nomads to gather intelligence in different directions outside the town. By now, it should be time for them to return. Suddenly, an alarm sounded in the monitoring room. The screen showed unidentified creatures approaching the perimeter wall, putting the guard soldiers on high alert as they rushed to check. Unexpectedly, the figures approaching were actually 2 humans, and the soldiers recognized them, letting them pass without any interrogation. One of them was Adam, one of the 12 nomads. The other was Xander, a key lieutenant of the rebel leader, Ben. Just 2 days ago, Xander had been exiled with Ben outside the wall, but miraculously, he had survived being surrounded by the Abbies and was instead kept as food. When he woke up, he found himself trapped in a huge cave. Before he could climb out, an Abbie charged down. Fueled by the will to survive, Xander summoned an incredible burst of strength and strangled the Abbie to death with his bare hands. By the time he finally climbed out of the cave, he was completely exhausted. Luckily, there was a water source nearby. Xander ran over to drink, unaware that a figure was silently approaching from behind. It was Adam, the nomad. He had been sent out 3 years ago by Pilcher to study the Abbies and search for surviving humans. Despite the danger, he managed to stay alive, though he only found Xander. After discussing, the two decided to return to Wayward Pines first. Desperate to live, Xander immediately declared before Kerry that he would turn over a new leaf and become a law-abiding citizen. He also reported crucial intelligence about the Abbies. They were not mindless beasts. Because of his years outside, Adam's physical condition was poor and required immediate examination by Theo. His abdomen was marked with numerous scars, witnessing his hardships over the 3 years. Fortunately, Adam wasn't without gains. He meaningfully told Theo that the Abbies were not enemies, but the replacements for humanity. He then left the hospital while Theo was absent. People on the street looked at Adam with curiosity, but he paid no mind, seeming to search for someone. He was spotted by Ben's mother, Teresa, who followed him into an alley. It turned out Adam was Teresa's husband, Ethan's direct superior. It was he who had originally sent Ethan to Wayward Pines to investigate the case. Teresa lashed out at Adam, blaming him for ruining her entire family's life. Adam remained silent throughout, clearly filled with guilt. Soon it was the day for CJ to explore the crop fields. Leading teams of soldiers through the town streets, Teresa suddenly stopped CJ's vehicle, wanting to join the search for her son. CJ nodded slightly. Adam was even more direct, jumping into a vehicle without asking. The large convoy passed through the perimeter wall and stopped in a clearing near a lake, where CJ planned to set up camp. Teresa approached Adam, asking if he was there to help her. He nodded, so Teresa described Ben's likely location near the crop fields. As night fell, Adam walked alone towards the distance, carrying weapons. Hours later, Teresa was awakened by noise outside the tent. She stepped out and saw Adam had returned with a body. Teresa naturally guessed the body was her son Ben. Her days of hope vanished, replaced by utter despair as she silently looked at those present before walking back to her tent. The scene shifted to the streets of Wayward Pines. A young man was staring blankly at a carousel when, for some reason, the machine suddenly stopped. The young man Liang Kongli discovered an Abbie staring intently at him. Fortunately, it did not attack. Guard soldiers quickly spotted this Abbie. Jason prepared to kill it outright, but Kerry recognized it as a female Abbie and suggested capturing it alive first. The female Abbie offered little resistance and was soon taken into the laboratory. Her arrival instantly quieted the other Abbies there. Until now, every Abbie they had encountered had been male. Moreover, this female Abbie had a unique marking on her hand. Everyone was very curious. Various signs indicated this female Abbie was not ordinary. Megan decided to study this female Abbie thoroughly, hoping to find a breakthrough to eradicate the Abbies. However, she was only a hypnotherapist and not well versed in biology, so Kerry invited Theo to assist with the research. Meanwhile, Security Captain Mario reported to Jason that they had searched the entire town and found no other Abbies, nor any breaches in the perimeter wall. This puzzled everyone. How did the Abbie get in? Jason seemed to think of something. He found Rebecca and asked, "Are you sure there are no security flaws in the town?" Rebecca was confident. She said if Abbies could infiltrate. It definitely wasn't a design flaw, or everyone would have perished long ago. It turned out Rebecca's identity was more than just Theo's wife. Over 2,000 years ago, the town founder Pilcher had approached Rebecca, a structural engineer, to design a town combining living and entertainment. When Rebecca finished working day and night, she excitedly asked Pilcher at the celebration banquet when they would start building the town. Pilcher replied it might take some time. Rebecca was dissatisfied, asking if it was 3 or 5 years. Megan interjected it might take 2,000 years. After hearing Pilcher's plan, Rebecca thought it was utterly insane and couldn't accept it immediately. Pilcher had to take her near the Wayward Pines site and introduce her to the core team members. Rebecca stopped resisting. For the town she had poured her heart into designing, she ultimately chose to join Pilcher's doomsday plan, and she kept this secret from her husband Theo. Fast forward 2,000 years, the first group awakened began preparing to build Wayward Pines. The first task was naturally to drive out the Abbies occupying the area. In a way, Pilcher and these town residents were the true invaders. Perhaps this was why the Abbies caused trouble for the town whenever they had the chance. And that wasn't the only thing Rebecca had hidden from Theo. Due to the town's breeding policies, Rebecca had married Xander in their second year after waking up. At that time, Theo was still in cryosleep. Now that he had adapted to town life, she felt it was time to tell the truth. Theo was naturally furious upon hearing this. Finally understanding why other women looked at him strangely, he angrily threw his wedding ring on the floor and punched Xander hard before storming out. Equally grief-stricken was Teresa outside the town. After burying her son herself, her tears never stopped. CJ urged her to return to the town as it wasn't safe outside. Teresa shook her head, saying she didn't want to go anywhere. Perhaps she didn't realize this seemingly simple refusal inadvertently ended her chance of survival. Not far away in the crop fields, rows of plants grew well. Suddenly, a group of Abbies charged forward holding torches, throwing them into the fields. It was clear the town residents' hard-earned crops would soon be destroyed. After setting the fields on fire, the Abbies all stood silently to the side, as if waiting for their next command. News of the Abbies' return quickly spread everywhere. All soldiers rushed to regroup, and adult men in the town were called to report to the fire station. Though not strong fighters, they could assist with firefighting. Theo was also immediately picked up by Kerry and taken to the hospital, where all medical staff were preparing. They knew a battle concerning their very survival was coming. However, the first to suffer were CJ and the others still exploring outside. Nomad. Adam was the first to notice something wrong. Seeing the fire in the crop fields, he shouted a warning, but it was too late. Abbies had already charged into the camp. Chaos erupted instantly. Teresa was also pounced on by an Abbie. Though Adam arrived in time to help, she was already seriously injured. Meanwhile, the security force led by Jason quickly reached the crop fields and immediately engaged the waiting Abbies in an intense battle. The enemy's unexpected ferocity left them no time to fight the fire. By the time the Abbies were repelled, the entire crop field was ablaze. Jason slumped to the ground in despair, knowing everything was lost. The hospital had now become another battlefield, with countless wounded being brought in. But apart from Theo, all the other doctors and nurses were interns, completely inexperienced in such scenes, yet they pressed on despite their fear, while Theo rushed around like a firefighter putting out emergencies. Fortunately, CJ and Adam escaped back to the town safely, their injuries not serious. Teresa's situation, however, was uncertain. Her bleeding was finally stopped, but she then fell into a coma. Adam walked into Teresa's room filled with sorrow, tightly holding her hands, his eyes full of guilt. Long before Wayward Pines was established, Adam had been bribed by Pilcher to join the Doomsday Plan, colluding with him to cover up the truth about the missing residents. Adam had secretly admired Teresa back then. That's why he set a trap to get her husband, Ethan, into Wayward Pines, thinking the helpless Teresa would eventually turn to him. He never expected this woman to be so persistent. Searching for her missing husband, she and her child accidentally stumbled into Wayward Pines too. Adam knew if not for his wicked thoughts, Teresa's family wouldn't have ended up like this. Teresa suddenly opened her eyes in her coma, withdrew her hands with disgust, and finally passed away peacefully while reminiscing about her family's happy times. Jason was clearly deeply shaken. He couldn't understand why the Abbies, seemingly gone, had suddenly returned. Kerry comforted him, saying, "No matter how lost or afraid you are, a leader shouldn't appear so weak." Jason perked up after hearing this and immediately called a meeting with key personnel. Mario had completed the tally. 35 soldiers died in the battle, leaving him critically short-handed. This wasn't even the worst news. CJ concluded this group of Abbies were not beasts. as they had quickly learned to use torches after seeing the soldiers use fire. But Jason still refused to believe they were an intelligent species, and the most pressing issue now was solving the food problem. CJ delivered more bad news. New crops would take months to plant and mature, and currently the food stocks were only enough to last the town residents for 6 weeks. Jason couldn't show any sign of losing composure. That afternoon, he held a memorial service for the 35 soldiers. He assured everyone that humanity originated from just one man and one woman, and with over 1,000 people still in the town, they would surely survive and thrive. But the practical problems he needed to solve were too many. Theo came to report that the hospital's drug supplies were also running low, and the town lacked the capability to manufacture medicine. Before Jason could devise a strategy, Mario rushed in to report that a large number of Abbies had gathered outside the perimeter wall. CJ believed the earlier Abbies retreat was a tactic to lure the soldiers out for an ambush in the wild. But Jason still insisted it was impossible, claiming they were just beasts. Even Theo couldn't stand it anymore, shouting at Jason to get his head straight before heading back to the laboratory. At that moment, Megan was performing an MRI on the female Abbie, whom she found unique and had named Margaret. When the Abbies burned the crops earlier, the other Abbies in the lab had shown resistance. Only Margaret remained eerily calm. Margaret's scan results soon came back. Theo was astonished after seeing them. The language center in Margaret's brain was highly developed. While a gorilla's is only 1/3 the size of a human's, hers was twice the size of a human's, clearly indicating far superior cognitive and communication abilities. The more Theo thought about it, the more disturbed he became. He immediately returned to the hospital to find Nomad Adam, the only survivor to have observed Abbies up close. Theo shared the lab findings and asked Adam if he had seen how the Abbies communicated. Adam was shocked upon hearing this and asked Theo if the female Abbie had a branded mark on the back of her hand. Theo hadn't noticed this detail and rushed back to the lab to check. Upon seeing the mark on Margaret's hand, his suspicion grew stronger. This pattern was clearly designed and branded with a tool. The Abbies definitely belonged to an intelligent species. He even speculated if Margaret's infiltration was part of some plan. Suddenly, Adam burst into the lab, shouting for them to release Margaret. Theo quickly stopped him. Adam explained he had personally witnessed Abbies spending months carving such patterns. It was a symbol of status, meaning Margaret was a leader of their kind, and the growing horde outside was gathering for her. As they spoke, powerful roars echoed from beyond the wall, ringing throughout every corner of Wayward Pines. Theo thought of a plan. Margaret's brain was far more advanced than an average human's, but the language barrier prevented communication. To resolve the siege, he decided to negotiate peace with Margaret. But their first task was to teach Margaret how to communicate. Theo took out cards with printed symbols, repeatedly teaching her their meanings, offering a food reward if she answered correctly. To their surprise, within just a few hours, Margaret understood all the cards. This was clearly a sophisticated tribe, and with their large numbers, replacing humanity was inevitable. Thus, Theo became even more determined to pursue peace talks. But Adam seemed to see things more clearly, stating that Wayward Pines leader Jason wouldn't see it that way. Megan took offense at this and promptly brought Jason over. By then, thousands of Abbies had gathered outside Wayward Pines. Theo presented his negotiation idea. Jason's face darkened upon hearing it. "Are we supposed to submit to these lower life forms?" Theo immediately countered. "Haven't you figured out why their leader infiltrated? She came to observe and learn our social structure." To prove Margaret's exceptional intelligence, Theo demonstrated with the cards again. Margaret cooperated actively, showing her willingness for peace, but Jason dismissed it as a simple trick, arguing most animals could learn that. Seeing this, Theo decided to take a risk. He held up a card symbolizing friendship in front of Margaret, then unlocked the cage next door and slowly reached his hand inside. Margaret instantly stopped her companion from harming Theo. This infuriated Jason. He shot the other Abbies dead, and as he aimed at Margaret, Theo seized the gun. Even Kerry disapproved of Jason's recklessness, repeatedly suggesting they try Theo's approach. Feeling utterly humiliated, Jason stormed out of the lab in anger. Megan, however, could understand Jason's perspective. Deeply influenced by Pilcher, Jason would never bow to what he saw as an inferior species like the Abbies. Now, Theo had no better solution and could only leave the lab in utter exhaustion. Of course, Jason was not without reflection. Together with Kerry, he went to CJ to ask about the origin of these Abbies. CJ was the most qualified person in the world to answer this. He He had personally witnessed the fall of human civilization and the rise of the Abbies over 2,000 years. While the chosen fortunate ones were all in deep sleep, only he awoke every 20 years for 24 hours to maintain the base equipment and gather as much information about the outside world as possible. Initially, he could still see through satellite TV that various countries were fighting a new type of virus, but after 400 years, many nations vanished under powerful weapons and severe natural disasters. CJ began going outside to monitor climate and environmental changes, discovering animals had started to mutate. He occasionally encountered human survivors, but to ensure the base's absolute security, CJ was forced to eliminate them. By 3214, CJ could receive no external signals, indicating humanity worldwide was essentially extinct. An indescribable loneliness washed over him. Although he only had to stay for 24 hours before sleeping again, it was still an ordeal for him. Fortunately, the belief in continuing the human race kept him persevering. The world's changes were like fine sand slipping through his fingers, and in the blink of an eye, it was 4014. Following the original plan, CJ awakened founder Pilcher and the first group of key members. He had already confirmed that land and air quality had returned to pre-industrial revolution levels. Pilcher looked at everything before him with immense excitement. While envisioning the future, he suddenly spotted an Abbie. CJ quickly urged Pilcher not to panic, as they wouldn't attack without provocation. But Pilcher felt that to build Wayward Pines here, they must be driven out. CJ didn't quite agree. Wasn't this invading their home? Maybe they should sleep for a few more thousand years. Pilcher, however, was brimming with confidence, asserting these savage creatures had no concept of community or home. Shortly after, Wayward Pines was built under Pilcher's iron-fisted rule. After the first awakened residents moved in, Megan decided to hold a welcoming ceremony and reveal the truth about civilization's destruction. But CJ felt deep concern. He hadn't been able to accept the loss of the old world in his 2,000 years. How could he expect them to accept it in an instant? Yet this was Pilcher's order, and Megan would enforce it strictly. CJ's fears became reality. That very night, the town descended into chaos, with riots, infighting, and breaches of the perimeter wall rampant. Wayward Pines ceased to exist within days. Now, the town had awakened 3 batches of residents and finally faced the Abbies. Fierce retaliation. Facing Jason's inquiry, CJ understood everything perfectly in his heart, but it was too late for words now. As if sensing a great calamity approaching, in the base laboratory, Megan was buried in work when she suddenly felt dizzy. Looking down, she saw a horrific new wound on her paralyzed leg, and the floor was awash with blood. The test subject, Margaret, escaped from her cage. It turned out she had secretly memorized the door lock code during Theo's earlier test. When Theo returned to the lab, he immediately sounded the alarm. Jason was speechless with rage upon learning this and mobilized all soldiers to search the laboratory. Ventilation ducts and sewers were key search areas. Despite everyone's best efforts, they ultimately found nothing. Because Margaret had escaped long before the alarm sounded, she traversed the dense pine forest, heading resolutely towards the town, seemingly confident she could scale Wayward Pines' perimeter wall. Jason's team turned the base upside down but found no trace of Margaret. Theo urged him to mobilize the townspeople for the search, warning that letting the Abbie's leader escape would have dire consequences. After all, the only reason the Abbies outside hadn't attacked was because their leader was still in captivity. Not long after, the town alarm sounded. All residents were to return indoors quickly, lock doors and windows, and students at school ran into classrooms. Broadcast trucks repeatedly announced that an Abbie had escaped the lab. Sightings must be reported immediately. Additionally, some younger individuals were forcibly conscripted into the security force. Unbeknownst to them, Margaret had already reached the town and immediately encountered a new recruit. She then lifted the corpse and carried it into the pine forest before returning to the town. By then, a large security force had arrived. Seeing Margaret, they opened fire, but she was too fast and quickly vanished from sight. Fortunately, the former rebels weren't idle. Xander distributed privately stored weapons, urging them to join the search. Rebecca directed them to specific search areas. Xander guessed the Abbie would try to escape along its entry route, but where exactly was that path? Rebecca deduced it could only escape through the sewer pipes. To find the exact location, they needed the original architectural blueprints. She had to go to Jason's office to retrieve the documents. Xander repeatedly urged Rebecca to be careful. She was pregnant. Meanwhile, Adam, hearing the broadcast, also recognized the severity of the situation. He met up with Theo to search for Margaret. While searching the pine forest, they found blood on some leaves. Following the trail through the woods for a long time, they finally discovered a soldier's corpse. Only then did they realize the Abbie had tricked them, wasting precious time. Theo speculated the Abbey wanted to head straight south through the entire town and escape via the perimeter wall there. Adam, however, felt this was Margaret laying a false trail. He parted ways with Theo, searching alone towards the east. Meanwhile, Margaret was still in the town, appearing on different streets intermittently, causing significant trouble for the guards. When she appeared on another street, she ran into Rebecca, who had just retrieved the blueprints. Just as she was about to attack Rebecca, she sensed her pregnancy and hesitated. Suddenly, gunfire rang out. Xander had arrived. Margaret was shot in the arm and fled into the distance. Rebecca quickly returned to her room. Comparing the blueprints, she soon identified a sewer outlet, the closest to the perimeter wall. Abbies, outside, could easily enter the tunnel by digging a few meters. Rebecca's deduction was correct. The injured Margaret dared not wander the town anymore. She headed straight for the tunnel entrance. Her earlier chaos in the town was actually to cover her tracks, preventing guards from discovering this entrance. But she hadn't expected the clever Adam to be waiting there. Yet Adam hesitated. He slowly lowered his weapon and followed Margaret into the sewer. Moments later, Adam crawled out through the exit. He found a massive gathering of Abbies there. However, constrained by Margaret, he was not attacked. Yet, the Abbies' deep-seated hostility towards humans was hard to erase quickly. Now, with their leader back, it was only a matter of time before they launched a full-scale assault on the human town. But Margaret's gunshot wound remained untreated, and she was growing increasingly weak. Inside Wayward Pines, chaos reigned due to the Abbies' leader's escape, with soldiers searching everywhere. Rebecca guessed Margaret's escape route. A large group of soldiers soon arrived at the sewer entrance leading out of town and discovered Adam's discarded weapon. Jason concluded Margaret must have escaped this way. Suddenly, roars came from beyond the perimeter wall. They immediately threw several high-explosive grenades, sealing the sewer pipe shut. But this was only a temporary fix. Monitors showed Abbies gathering in ever-increasing numbers outside the town. Overrunning it was inevitable. Jason, however, seemed unconcerned. He led Kerry into a separate, heavily fortified room with thick walls containing 2 cryo chambers. This was Jason's planned escape route. Even if the town fell, he and Kerry could hide here, continuing the human race, like Adam and Eve. But Kerry was filled with sorrow upon hearing this. She had been attacked by the Abbies before, and although Theo had saved her life, she had lost the ability to have children. Kerry hadn't dared to tell Jason at the time, because procreation was the most important thing in Wayward Pines. Although Jason didn't blame Kerry, his grand plan for human continuation had to change. Kerry saw the injured Margaret on the monitors and wondered if her death would stop the Abbies' attack. Jason immediately dismissed the idea. Even if Margaret died, the Abbies would choose a new leader, just like they would dig a new tunnel if one was destroyed. The outcome was probably inevitable, only a matter of time. Jason seemed to have an idea. He told Kerry to summon CJ and Theo. Having witnessed Jason pushing the town towards ruin, Theo was deeply disillusioned. He found Xander, stating he would never obey Jason's orders again, and sought Xander's support. Xander agreed to stand with Theo. While they were talking, CJ found Theo and invited him to meet Jason. Jason looked utterly defeated now, seemingly aware of the situation. He didn't speak foolishly about fighting the Abbies to the death, but proposed an unexpected solution. Jason then gathered the residents of Wayward Pines for a grand speech. He candidly explained their dire predicament and announced a plan to re-enter cryosleep, causing a stir among the residents below. CJ quickly stepped in to support him, assuring that the cryo chamber technology was mature, and all they needed to do was proceed to the base in an orderly manner. Jason had clearly lost patience. Without even a word, he turned and walked away. However, CJ discovered upon inspecting the cryo chambers that the available power was insufficient to maintain all the units. Jason's face paled upon hearing this. He asked how many chambers could be used, and CJ answered 571. Jason immediately found Theo, instructing him to compile health assessments for all residents and assign evaluation scores. Theo was instantly suspicious, realizing Jason couldn't take everyone. These scores were the basis for choosing who to save and who to abandon. Seeing he couldn't hide it, Jason confessed the cryo chamber shortage. Theo felt this was deeply unfair. A lottery would be the most ethical way. But Jason, thinking as a leader, argued that people with special skills like Theo and all the first-generation students had to be taken. It was the choice most beneficial for the greater good. Theo strongly disagreed and argued back. Since his deputy Kerry couldn't bear children and had no value, should she be left behind too? This made Jason's eyes widen in anger. Kerry happened to walk in then, interrupting their argument. Jason just greeted her and left. Theo told Kerry about the cryo chambers and suggested Jason might abandon her. The best solution now was to remove Jason. Kerry firmly believed Jason would never do that, but Theo told her Jason didn't love her. he loved the founder, Pilcher. Meanwhile, Jason was screening personnel files. At the bottom of a box, he accidentally found secret documents left by Pilcher. After reading the contents, Jason was so shocked, he threw them in the trash. The documents revealed a horrifying past. In the final stages before the Doomsday Plan launched, founder Pilcher focused all his energy on finding the next generation's leader. The best candidates were naturally infants with superior genetics. He identified many pregnant single women, finally settling on an elite family. Pilcher successfully convinced a couple to give him their daughter's unborn child. The expectant mother was a well-educated, exceptionally intelligent girl. Pilcher was very satisfied, believing her child would be extraordinary. But just 10 days before the Doomsday Plan began, Pilcher received devastating news. The child chosen as the second-generation leader had died. He had to find a replacement, and time was running out. In a rush, Pilcher went to a hospital and, by donating a large sum of money, secured a newborn infant. The child's mother was Kerry. Though born into a common family, her intelligence and capability evident in her demeanor impressed Pilcher. He felt she would be the perfect support for the future ruler. He made a bold, last-minute decision to take Kerry to Wayward Pines too, and to alter her records to conceal her identity as the future ruler's mother. At first glance, Kerry seemed the epitome of beauty and intelligence. Jason was immediately taken with her file and ordered her awakened from cryo sleep. Although they were mother and son, Kerry awoke over a decade later. Outwardly, nothing seemed amiss, and the most harmonious partnership in history was born. It wasn't until Jason accidentally found Pilcher's secret files that he discovered this historical truth. Just then, Kerry entered the room. Somewhat shaken by Theo's words, she wanted to test if Jason really planned to abandon her, but Jason had no mind for that now. His head was filled with the thought that Kerry had deliberately hidden the truth about their mother-son relationship. Kerry was innocent. Pilcher had never told her what became of her child. Their argument escalated into a physical struggle. In the tussle, Jason reached for his gun, and Kerry desperately tried to stop him. Jason lay covered in blood beside Kerry. She looked at him nervously. Meanwhile, more residents were arriving at the entrance to the base, hoping to enter the cryo chamber early. But the soldiers had received no orders and weren't letting anyone in yet. More and more people gathered, peering anxiously inside. They didn't know half would be ruthlessly abandoned, nor when the terrifying Abbies outside might break in. In the woods beyond Wayward Pines, several Abbies surrounded the barely alive Margaret. They used a red-hot stick to cauterize her wound, then bandaged it with plant leaves, also feeding her an unknown liquid. This was their tribe's method of healing. That night, the sleeping Margaret suddenly awoke, restored to her former vigor. The next day, Margaret summoned all the Abbies. Instead of attacking immediately, they went to nearby tribes to gather reinforcements. Countless Abbies began converging on the town. At that moment, Jason was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. Despite being operated on by the expert surgeon Theo, unfortunately, the town's ruler passed away forever. A crowd gathered outside the hospital awaiting news. Theo came out first and announced Jason's death, drawing looks of sorrow from everyone. Theo urged everyone to hold back their sorrow. The most important thing now was to evacuate the town in an orderly manner, according to Jason's final wishes, preserving humanity's last hope. Though Theo's words sounded noble, Oscar couldn't help but voice doubt. During Jason's open-heart surgery, Theo hadn't drained the blood, a glaring, basic error. He suspected Theo deliberately caused Jason's death. Theo naturally denied it. Whether he did or not, only Theo truly knew. Oscar also found something interesting. Jason had an extremely rare blood type. In the entire town, besides his relatives, only Kerry shared it. This made Theo consider a possibility. After checking the records, he approached Kerry and voiced his suspicion. Jason had been placed in cryosleep just days after birth, and Kerry entered cryosleep shortly after giving birth. Coincidentally, they shared an extremely rare blood type. The implication was clear even to a fool. Jason was her son. Kerry's stomach churned at the realization. Arlene had also heard some news about the evacuation list. She volunteered herself before Theo, stating she had worked many jobs and was highly capable, urging Dr. Theo not to abandon her. Her words reminded Theo, so he immediately went to find CJ, the town's temporary commander. To his surprise, CJ's evacuation list still followed the one drafted by Jason before his death, prioritizing residents with special skills and the younger generation. Theo was deeply opposed to this. CJ tried to reason, asking if Theo had a better solution, as even a lottery wasn't feasible now. The Abbies could attack at any moment. Theo looked at him in silence, realizing that the decision was already set in stone. Outside the town, Abbies from other tribes were already on the move, rapidly converging on Wayward Pines. Margaret looked at the growing number of warriors before her and let out a powerful roar towards the sky. A full-scale species war was imminent. Inside the town, soldiers had begun escorting residents to the base in batches to enter the cryo chambers, instructing them to bring only essential personal valuables. Since the stay or leave list was already set, those not selected had to remain at home. Soldiers didn't tell them they were being abandoned, falsely claiming they would leave in the next wave. Those chosen had already started entering the cryo chambers in an orderly fashion. Having lived in the town for so long, they knew they had no choice but to obey. Kerry was fortunate. Jason's death freed up one chamber slot, and due to Theo's insistence, she, originally not on the list, was finally able to enter a cryo chamber. The school students were among the first escorted and were nearly finished. Surprisingly, several students were also left behind. The reason was somewhat ironic. They had previously shown resistance to the town's pairing program. A tall boy saw his sister reluctant to leave him and tried to rush over to comfort her, only to be knocked down by a soldier. At this point, there was no sign left of the town's supposed care for the first-generation youth. Meanwhile, several soldiers knocked on Rebecca's door to take her to the base's cryo chambers, but Xander was stopped. The soldier explained entry to the cryo chambers was sequential. He had to wait for the next batch. Rebecca naturally refused, insisting on leaving with Xander. Xander seemed to have figured out the truth. He pulled Rebecca aside and gently persuaded her, and only then did she agree to leave with the soldiers. As the town's escort operation neared completion, CJ went to the lab to find Theo, urging him to head to the cryo chambers immediately. Doctors were scarce resources and must be protected, but Theo had completely lost faith in this decaying town. He believed everyone deserved the right to choose their own life, not be kidnapped here. Even if they had died in the Great Catastrophe over 2,000 years ago, they would have had a complete life. Thus, Theo made a crucial decision. He decided to forego prolonging his life in a cryo chamber and instead contribute to humanity's continuation in his own way. In a recorded message, he outlined his plan. The lab preserved many historically significant human pathogens. Theo planned to inject himself with 3 deadly diseases: plague, typhoid, and Marburg virus. Then, during the incubation period, he would walk out of the town for the Abbies to consume him. He estimated that if these 3 viruses spread, it could potentially wipe out the Abbies. The sleeping residents could then awaken sooner and restart their lives. Monitor feeds showed the number of Abbies gathering outside the town was terrifyingly large. Humanity's time was running out. The residents left behind in the town now realized they had been ruthlessly abandoned. Most of them were the elderly, the weak, or the sick. Of course, some were left behind because they were too violent or rebellious, and the former rebel Xander was one of them. He saw countless people on the streets starting to burn, loot, and kill, desperately venting their final fury to express their resentment. Many even began storming the base perimeter fence. After a soldier escorted the last few residents into the base, he was killed by the angry mob. CJ had to fire warning shots to quell the chaos. Frank was one of the few remaining rational people. He walked silently down the street and encountered Xander drinking alone. 2 men sharing the same fate began to console each other. Suddenly, a jeep sped towards them. It was Theo. He told Xander and Frank to get in quickly. Just as he started the vehicle, 2 unfriendly men blocked the road. Without a word, Xander got out and shot them. In this environment, perhaps violence was the only effective response. Theo drove them to the base entrance, urging them to enter the cryo chambers immediately. Since a soldier had just died, plus his own spot, exactly 2 slots were now free. Theo then headed to the lab to execute his destruction plan, only to find the prepared pathogen samples were gone. Kerry, who should have been in a cryo chamber, had learned of Theo's plan. She had injected herself with the 3 pathogens instead. After killing Jason and discovering their connection, she had lost all will to live. She believed Theo was the town's true hope, so she made this decision. It was too late to argue. Theo handed her the painkillers he had prepared and told her to take them before leaving the wall. It would lessen her suffering. Kerry was perhaps the most tragic character in the series. She was just an ordinary girl until encountering Pilcher changed everything. Only the final group remained, waiting to enter the cryo chambers. Theo stood before them and delivered his last speech. He had witnessed humanity's darkest aspects in this town, but also encountered moments of brilliance. Perhaps this was true human society. He hoped this spark of civilization would thrive and multiply in the future. After Theo entered a cryo chamber with the others, CJ began the final shutdown procedures. He cut power to the entire town, preserving only essential energy for the base. But when setting the cryo chamber sleep duration, He hesitated. Pressing the termination button would erase the last humans. Thankfully, he didn't do it. Holding on to a sliver of hope, CJ also entered cryosleep. The pitiful abandoned residents could only end their lives in ways they deemed dignified. By now, Kerry, injected with the mixed pathogens, had reached outside the perimeter wall. Soon after, terrifying roars echoed through the air. Years later, in the lush forest, a few Abbies were foraging, and one of them was holding a baby in its arms. This concludes all of Wayward Pines Season 2. While the show doesn't explicitly state humanity's ultimate fate, the final scene carries significant implication, with the infant's hair being powerful evidence. Given this, whether the residents of Wayward Pines awaken may have become largely irrelevant, because the ever-evolving Abbies would inevitably replace humans as the new intelligent species.